back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the penultimate story of Series 7, The Nightmare in Silver, written by Neil Gaiman and is directed by Stephen Wolfender, which is his only story he directed for the series. Now, this was actually a very highly anticipated episode for Series 7, with Neil Gaiman returning, a very famous writer in British culture, mainly known for his works on American Gods and Good Omens. And he also wrote the story prior in series 6 with The Doctor's Wife, which is hugely acclaimed. And it was actually when he won an Emmy Award for his work on the Doctor's Wife, did he announce that he was actually writing for Series 7. And then it came to a massive claimed surprise that Neil Gaiman would be writing a Cyberman story. He will be the one to bring Cybermen to the front, and a lot of details, a lot of information were to be revealed about this story. One thing behind the scenes, which is always something that I find kind of amusing, in The Good Man Goes to War, it was announced that the Cybermen that we see there are the return of the Mondasian Cybermen. However, with their appearance still the Cyber's design, and they didn't get much screen time, that was actually retconned back into, in terms of behind the scenes information, as them being the main Cyber's design. It was then retconned behind the scenes that the Mondasian Cybermen would be actually returning in Closing Time, which still used the same costumes, and then after the story aired, it was described again as using the Mondasian, the Cybermen. With this story then, with Nicholas Briggs even claiming that this was the first appearance of the Mondasian Cybermen within the revived era of Doctor Who. So, and he basically announced with the new design, and they actually feature certain elements that are quintessential to classic Cybermen, and certain elements which were quintessential to the classic Cybermen return into this story. It seemed like this was going to be the final story that was going to feature, without a single hesitant doubt, that this was going to be the Mondasian Cybermen returning, and it was to an extent. This firmly established, right? The Mondasian Cybermen are back within the main universe of Doctor Who, and it does feature many elements which confirms this. Their weakness to gold, the fact that the Cybermen are a dying, if not an extinct race, that need to hide in the shadows to survive, essentially. And there's a lot of key details. And Neil Gaiman was essentially brought on to essentially make the Cybermen scary again, to make him a prominent threat, unlike previous stories like Closing Time, like The Next Doctor, where they were mainly either a background or a plot device within the narrative. This story would be the first story in a while that the Cybermen would take centre stage. So that was a lot of built up upon. When the story first aired, personally, I must admit, I actually really enjoyed it, mainly for those elements that it did bring back the Mondasian Cybermen, using certain elements, certain plot points, and certain themes that the classic Cybermen would have. And maybe I was over excited for those elements that it kind of blinded me to certain issues. But over time, the story has not favoured well. A lot of people citing it as one of the, if not the worst Cyberman story that prominently features them. And even Neil Gaiman himself has come out that a lot of issues came out behind the scenes. With many issues, he has stated it's one of the best scripts he's ever written, but one of the worst things he's ever seen. Sentimentality. He hasn't really gone into too much detail on what actually was changed, whether he can't tell due to some copyright with the BBC or not. Don't know. But one factor we actually do know, oddly enough, is its colour palette. He actually imagined this world to have a sort of green tint to it, whilst in the aired version, it's got a blue, if not purplish, look to the whole thing. So that's something. That has nothing really to do with anything. But that is described one thing to many issues, and a lot of people have criticised this story on multiple fronts. One of them being the inclusion of the kids. But with that out of the way, shall we jump onto the story? The first thing we actually see is the Doctor and Clara actually bringing two new characters on board. Characters which have been previously had little cameo appearances in stories like The Bells of St. John, and have also appeared at the end of the last story, The Crimson Horror, where they blackmailed Clara into taking them to time traveling. These are the characters of Angie and Archie and Angie, these two kids, which really let this story down. I'm not going to talk about them too much because you can essentially, though they are prominent characters, they do appear in the front. They don't really do much anything, with the exception of with Angie being easily the worst. Archie doesn't really get much to do. He's sort of like the innocent of the two of them. But Angie, what an annoying character. She, apart from two scenes, one of them right at the very end. One of them is when they use this anti-grav system so that they can play around and stuff. All she does is complain. And I don't want to say like the bad actor, the kid actors on this, and maybe they could do what they work with. But personally, I found the performances incredibly frustrating and annoying. But I won't talk about too much about two of them because I feel like there is a lot to talk about, and I think everybody's done to death about the issues they have with this story, particularly with those kids. Essentially, the Doctor takes them to this world. We get to see them investigating this new world. They get captured by the Cybermen, which we learn that the Cybermen basically reawoken after they've sensed children. They need children for their massive processing power, something to do with the child's infinite imagination, which is actually something that ties into Remembrance of the Daleks, where the Daleks take a child for similar, if not identical, reasons. So that does kind of have a prominent within the Doctor Who universe. But then after that point is established, which is really early on, that element, the kids are mainly just in like a walk-in coma throughout the rest of the story till the very end. And honestly, I could easily editing them out in my head when I watch this story. They're annoying and they are a pain in the ass, and the story would have easily benefited without them. But the fact that they're here is really frustrating. But personally, I can easily picture in my head and get them out of the way, because fact is this story also has more issues on top of each other. Essentially, we also get introduced to a few other characters. Most noticeably is Webley and Porridge. Webley is played by Jason Watkins, a very big TV actor. He's mostly known for having these small, quirky, entertaining roles. And sometimes, I think he's done a lot of crime dramas as well. He has just this big personality, this big... he's one of Britain's most charismatic actors. He would be a great Doctor, in my opinion, thinking about it. And for the first small half of the story, he does what you want a character played by Jason Watkins to do. He has this kind of entertainer, this shelved but also extraordinary eccentric character who basically has lived with this character Porridge in the beginning of the story, and you do get the feel for him, and he's got this collection of strange alien mannequins, and one of them is his prized possession, which is actually the cliffhanger for the pre-credit sequence is that he has a Cyberman, a Mondasian Cyberman, which we'll talk about a bit, that can play chess. And there are some really great moments. Like I like how Webley is like, right, does anybody know how to play chess? And the Doctor like puts his hand up, and Webley looks at the kids and it's like, maybe you can play chess. It's like, actually I'm really good at chess, so I'll play chess with the Cyberman. And the Doctor's just like disappointed at that. Matt Smith, we need to talk about Matt Smith later on in the episode, because that's something that's really controversial to the episode. If you know what I'm on about, you know what I'm on about if you've seen the episode, when it comes to the Doctor's particular role within this narrative. But yeah, let's talk about the Cybermen before we get into Porridge. The Cybermen, when it's first established in the story, we actually see 3 Mondasian style designs of the Cybermen. And this is the thing, it's firmly established in this story that these are the Mondasian Cybermen. However, we still are using the Cybermen at the start of the story, implying that these Cybermen came from the Cyber's design. So, what the hell's going on with the canon of the show? Like, does what? I wouldn't make such a fuss about it, apart from in behind the scenes, Nicholas Briggs specifically and Neil Gaiman made a huge emphasis that this was the return of the Mondasian Cybermen. So it's really confusing. I understand for a newer audience, it doesn't really matter or doesn't really care. But as somebody who is such a fanboy, shall we say, for the original Cybermen and how they were portrayed in the classic series, it's just, it's a bit emotionally confused in that sense. It doesn't know if it wants to distance itself or continue on the tradition of the Cyber's design. So it's really confusing, it's really complex, but that's mainly a little nitpick into the narrative. So yeah, we get introduced to a new Cyberman again. We'll push everything to the side for the moment. Let's talk about Porridge. Porridge is played by the wonderful, the brilliant, I don't know, he's just such a great actor in my opinion, Warwick Davis. Now, Warwick Davis has a huge history with sci-fi. Most noticeably, one of his first roles is that he played an Ewok in Return of the Jedi, when he was, I believe he was 8-year-old at the time, and he's had a massive love and this massive appreciation for sci-fi. So it was only around about time that famous British sci-fi actor Warwick Davis would play a character in Doctor Who. Now, a lot of, it is also really cool how, despite the fact that of his size, he suffers from dwarfism. He actually has this massive presence on screen, and he has this really nice character he's very sweet. He's very closed off to people in a sense. He's very kind to people. He doesn't really hide anything, but he keeps secrets to himself, and he has this kind of loneliness about him, which, even though he's been hanging around with Webley, he has this sort of distance around him. Now let's go back to Webley for a sec, because Webley, like I said, Jason Watkins, such a fantastic actor, such a bombastic character. He gets turned into a semi-Cyberman earlier on in the episode. Now, don't get me wrong, if this was just any other actor, I wouldn't have too much of an issue with it. But the fact that he had British icon Jason Watkins in this episode, it felt like a complete waste. And I'm just glad that Warwick Davis didn't gain the same treatment. Warwick Davis basically is the main character within this particular narrative, not including our main TARDIS crew. And essentially and also when we got this, we also have a punishment brigade, a military force which are basically They've made poor decisions in their military careers. So they've basically been put onto this planet defensive against basically nothing, no harm at all, to basically try and push them out of the way in the hopes that they won't get anybody into trouble. This should lead into an interesting characters. You've got an entire group of basically losers, and it's up to our characters to basically teach them to look inside themselves and be great, right? Well, there's only really one character I can think off the top of my head, and that's the captain who dies earlier on in the episode, played by Tamsin Outwaithy, if I'm probably butchering her last name. I can't remember her actual character's name, but all she does really is she's basically the leader. However, the Doctor, pretending to be one of the royals in the empire of this civilization at the moment. We also get little hints that the Emperor has gone missing throughout the story, and the Doctor basically appoints Clara as the new leader of the brigade, and goes off to try and find the Cybermites, the Cybermen, as the Cybermen basically kidnap the children. They kidnap Andy, and then Archie, and Angie then goes looking at the brigade because she's quote-unquote bored. And it's here that we actually get our first introduction to the Cybermen. I personally really like the new design. They're slim, they're sleek. This is something that you can actually picture them sneaking up behind you, which is something that makes more elements of classic series, where you would be around the corridor and suddenly a Cyberman would grab up from behind you or smash the nearby door coming out of nowhere. This was something that was kind of lost within the Revival series, when you had the stompy Cybers design, which, sure, the threat is, it's a different threat. I understand that, and I understand, a lot of people really like the whole, you can hear them from a distance. It's that overwhelming doom and gloom kind of feeling where you know that they're coming for you. They're not even going to bother running because they know they're going to get you eventually. But this is a different kind of threat. This is the type that I personally prefer, where it's a much more sneak attacks, a lot more in the shadows, and this new design, this new sleek design, helps to reaffirm that to the audience. I also kind of like the froggy voice, the voice that Nicholas Briggs gives them as well, although it doesn't really have much personality. It's nothing that you're going to get a performance like the Cyber Leader from Tomb of the Cybermen, or David Banks, Cyber Controller from Earthshock, Attack of the Cybermen, and Silver Nemesis. We're never going to get a character like that within this version of the Cybermen. But yeah, I personally really like the design, personally. However, this story also re-establishes this idea of adaptation. In fact, this story, because it's set in the distant future, basically we established here that the Cybermen did fought a terrible and deadly war across the universe. However, they are now being extinct. They are low in numbers, if not completely dead, wiped out. Nobody has seen a Cyberman in hundreds and hundreds of years. We get this great mythos about this story, about the previous Cybermen. And that's something, again, is something much more akin to the classic series, where we hear about this idea of the Cybermen and their fear and the horrors that they inspire. And we hear that they are kind of low in numbers, and it's up to them to basically survive. They basically do everything to survive because they are a dying race, and they will do anything in their power to survive. And we get that here. There's a great little story that Porridge tells Clara about how they've adapted so well, they've adapted so much so far, that the only way, and the way we found out to destroy the Cybermen, is quite literally destroying the planet that you're on. That is really powerful stuff. That is really cool. Although here we actually get this, the Cybermen here actually kind of take that to extreme. We get moments where people are shooting guns at them, they might get like a damage on the soldier, and then automatically they've upgraded to the point where bullets like that cannot hurt them anymore. And this happens really quickly. And they also adapt them new powers, new abilities. The first Cyberman we see actually has the ability of super speed and actually captures one of the kids by this weird cool effect where it's like bullet time, where the Cyberman runs to the other side of the room, captures the kid and runs off. It then does beg the question, actually we'll talk about that after we talk about other elements. We can also see a Cyberman whose ability can take off its head, and we see one that can take off its hand and twist its head around, and they have all of these new strange abilities. Now, this is one of the big aspects of the story that people don't like. Also, they can adaptate now any living form. It doesn't have to be human anymore. And this actually comes as a big issue with the story, because it does then beg the question, if the Cybermen can have super speed, if they can detach limbs, why don't they do that all the bloody time? Why then, after, it would solve 99.9% of their problems. There are scenes after they've established that they can have super speed, do they then slowly walk towards their enemies? And that becomes a big factor, because it's the equivalent of, aha, I've defeated you by infinity. Haha, I've defeated you by infinity +1. Yes, I know, it's a Mr. TARDIS joke. But let me have it, come on. It is the best example I can think of. They're too overpowered, if that makes sense. Now, when I first watched this, and even now, I really don't have an issue with it personally, let's say. The idea of it, the good intentions, is that we want to make the Cybermen scary again. We want the Cybermen to be this terrifying force again. And Neil Gaiman really has done that. There are scenes where basically all of our characters are backed up to a corner as they basically are defenseless against the Cybermen. But they're so overpowered that it does beg the question, why don't they just use all their abilities all the time? It becomes an issue. And one of the biggest issues for many people is the inclusion of that said, now they can transform any living matter into Cybermen. Because what they do is that they take Cybermat and turn the Doctor into the new Cyber Planner. And this is where we basically get that emotion of the Cybermen. Because in the classic series, yes, the Cybermen are supposed to be motionless creatures. However, especially in the 80s, my favourite Cybermen, there was this hint and this idea of emotions. You had the Cyber leader saying, excellent, and having these very emotional responses. This stops them from just sounding like dull robots and tries to keep the story engaging, because you can't have the Doctor basically fighting, talking to a computer. You need somebody that can challenge the Doctor on an emotional level. Like that great scene with the 5th Doctor and the Cyber Leader, where he basically threatens Tegan and basically reveals that these emotions are your weaknesses. We need a character like that, because a normal Cyberman can't do that. So we have this Cyber Planner, and essentially it's a split evil personality of the Doctor. And this is where one of the biggest criticisms with the story comes in, because the Cyber Planner, aka Mr. Clever, is a big aspect of the story. And a lot of people cite this as one of Matt Smith's weakest performances, because the Cyber Planner here isn't an emotionless creature, or at least a less emotional version of the Doctor. In fact, it's the far opposite. The Cyber Planner, Mr. Clever, is this really, really over-the-top, quirky, eccentric character. He's jumping on tables, he's grabbing people and like, this is amazing! Oh, they've got ideas of the Time Lords in here. And he has all of these big, bombastic expressions and personality traits. And a lot of people cite this as, again, like I said, Matt Smith's weakest performance because of that over-the-topness. However, I actually feel like it does semi sort of work. I mean, I do have an issue. I do wish that he played it in a way where the Mr. Clever persona was a lot more serious than the Doctor. But it also means that Matt Smith gets this duality role, and you can tell just by on the screen, just by certain hints, certain details, a certain way that Matt Smith's voice changes, the way Matt Smith moves his hands changes from his persona as the 11th Doctor and his persona as Mr. Clever. And like the Mr. Clever, the Cyber Planner calls himself Mr. Clever. So a lot of people have put this in this idea in their heads, and though there's nothing in the story, I like to think so as well. Again, this is nothing, I can't really cite the story as being good or bad because it's not actually part of the story, in which the Cyber Planner is at the moment just going through the Doctor's memories and is kind of borrowing his elements, and that's why this Cyber Planner is so quirky, is so eccentric, is because at the moment it hasn't fully taken the Doctor's brain yet and turned it into an emotionless being. So, yeah, we get these really long takes of just Matt Smith acting on himself. And I personally think it's really engaging and really working. However, I'd like to state that a lot of people didn't think this. A lot of people thought his Mr. Clever persona was really embarrassing, to say the least. But I personally really liked it. I also especially liked that scene where, especially retroactively, where basically the Doctor threatens that he can regenerate, and he can easily just wipe out any cybermats out of his brain, killing the Cyber Planner. However, as we learn retroactively, this is obviously a lie, because the 11th Doctor knows for a fact that he cannot regenerate again. So, does that mean that he was bluffing? And it actually is established in the story how a bluff like that can work. Because as the Cyber Planner once mentions in the story, there's a complete mental block. And so that's mainly the focus of the story, especially with this chess game, which I don't know how chess really works, but the story doesn't show us enough shots, show us enough elements of the chess game for us to really get engaged with the plot of it, with the exception of one element where the Doctor has to sacrifice his bishop so that he can have the kids back. Apart from that, we don't really get a great idea of this chess game. But that's beside the point. Now let's talk about Clara, because this suffers from one of the main elements of Clara throughout the series. She doesn't really have that much of a personality in the story. She's really the bossy, she's basically a bossy drill sergeant with full of confidence, and she comes up with any issues, any issues that her men, her soldiers have at her. And when when Tamsin's character, the captain, is not happy with some of Clara's orders, Clara puts on this almost perfect, drill sergeant character and tells the captain basically to obey my orders. Sorry, I don't know what's happening there. And this now is a massive issue, because not only does it mean that Clara doesn't really get much to learn, much to experience in the story, she automatically starts off as this character that can easily boss these characters around. It's a complete different character from what we've seen in previous stories. This is a completely different character from the Clara who was nervous, who was afraid, who needed the Doctor to dare her in Hyde. This is a completely different Clara that went after a little girl just because she looked scared in the Rings of Akaten. This is a completely different Clara who had this kind of sweet-eyed persona in the Crimson Horror. That's the thing with Clara. If the writers stuck to one of these ideas of Clara's, we might have had a great series. However, Clara keeps switching personalities between depending on what the story, depending on what the writers need her to be. And in some ways, it's actually a massive compliment to Jenna Louise Coleman, because she's able to nail all of these different personas of Clara, even when she's actually playing different variations of Clara. But the problem is that it's not the same Clara throughout the series. Does that make any sense? It seems like Jenna Louise Coleman is playing different characters throughout every episode. It does make me feel that there's a missing plot line in Series 7 Part B, where every episode was supposed to feature a different Clara, and it was only worked very later on in the stories where it was decided that the modern incarnation of Clara would be the Clara going forward. I have no idea, I don't actually know, that's just a guess on my part, but going by the stories, that could be a possibility. And so, let's come up to the conclusion of the story. Also, as well, Stephen Wolfender does a great job at directing. There's some really polished looking scenes, some really clean scenes, and some really great impactful shots. However, some bits really don't add up with the script we're given. For example, we are established at one point that there's this castle that's comically influenced, that it's a castle, but it's comical. However, when we get to the castle, it's just a normal castle. What's the difference between like any normal other castle than this? I wouldn't have minded so mad, but they built this up in the story that this is a comical castle. It's really strange. And so, essentially they activate this self-destruct bomb after Angie basically reveals to everybody that Porridge is the Emperor. Now, throughout the story, at the start of the story, we saw a mannequin of an Emperor, normal size. That sounds really bad. Tall. He looked so tall in the mannequin. And also Angie gets his coin, Imperial coin, which apparently has an image of the Emperor, which is a Porridge. And she says, oh, it's obvious. But this is a complete fallacy on the part of the audience, because that mannequin looks nothing like Warwick Davis. And that coin is supposed to be a big part of this mystery of who the Emperor is or where he is. How many times do we see a shot of that coin where we get to see the face on it? Shall I tell you? 0. 0 times. How are we supposed to, as audience members, get that? And Angie is like, oh, isn't it obvious? Am I the only one paying attention here? And the Doctor and Clara are like, oh, that's very clever. You're full of surprises. And yeah, she's confirmed right, but the audience, it doesn't feel like, it feels like she said it because the script needs her to. Because Porridge being the Emperor means that we get a massive way of getting out of here, as he can activate not only a self-destruct system, but also sends a teleport to the Empire's flagship. That does then again beg the question, why didn't they do this at the very start of the story? Sure, they could make an argument that there's people there. However, and Porridge, he was trying to keep his identity secret for a moment. He didn't want to go back to the Empire. He felt like his job was lonely. He wanted to escape that lifestyle. But the fact that he left, and the only reason really he did it is because Angie basically caught him that he is the Emperor. And it just felt like, okay, you got me. I'll go back to my life as basically being the lonely Emperor again. And we have this joke then at the end of the story where Warwick Davis proposes to Jenna Louise Coleman, which is really funny. But also then we get the final moments where they're saying goodbye to everybody, and we get probably one of the worst lines in the Matt Smith era. So a very famous line, which me and my mates, when we were talking about Series 7 when recently we were trying to figure out which episode this line comes from. It comes from Nightmare in Silver, in which the Doctor is like wrapping his head around Clara, and it's like a mystery wearing a tight, which is it might be a bit too short, and that's just a really disgusting, out of character line for the Doctor. Ugh, it makes you feel really uncomfortable. And that is Nightmare in Silver. Now, I don't want to blame Neil Gaiman here, because he has come out with a record of saying that many issues came out of the way, and basically the script that we saw isn't the script that he'd written. But something clearly went wrong in the script department. It's mainly the plot elements, the writing. Also, the writing on the kids was just the worst. And so I really believe that that was a last minute addition to the series, to this story, the addition of Angie and Archie. So yeah, overall, I think I like it more than most people would, because I really do like the Cybermen in this story. I like the design. I like how they're a prominent threat again, and I like how they do stick true to the original ideas of the Cybermen. Cybermen who are closed in the shadows. They sneak up on you. They have this ideology that they must survive. They even, at one point, when they're threatening to basically convert people, they basically say, "Welcome to the Siberia," as if this is like you should be grateful. Welcome to the Siberia, as if like they're giving you a massive hug. I really like that idea of like the Siberia stuff. I don't know what the Siberia is per se, but the fact that they say it so welcoming, it really does give this feeling that they don't understand why humans are so terrified of this conversion into Cybermen. And yeah, the Cybermen themselves are dealt very well here to an extent, but they're overpowered, and to the point where the story does kind of have to dance around that. Also, as well, majority of the characters are so either utilised to very little degree with Webley and Porridge, or are just really bland and forgettable, like the kids and the captain and anybody from the military coup. To be honest, the story is only really saved by how the story is directed, how it looks. The Sidemen sticking more true to their classic roots, and in my opinion, Matt Smith's performance. Although I know that won't be part for everybody. So yeah, Nightmare in Silver, a mixed bag in my opinion, hated by loads. But if you haven't seen it in a while, maybe give it a watch. I doubt you're gonna like it. I doubt it's going to change your mind if you didn't like it prior, but maybe there's certain elements of it that you can find and enjoy with the story. So anyway, that's Nightmare in Silver. So join me next time where the Doctor goes to his the place he's terrified the most, as the question must be asked, the one question that must never ever be asked. The Doctor must come face to face with his greatest fear, as his friends have been put on the front lines. So join me next time for the name of the Doctor. And I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da!